So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Teaching for the Future, Educating with United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Our presenter for today is Susan Golden. We are going to start by just a couple things to mention for everybody. We're going to ask that you all keep yourselves on mute, just so we're able to hear our presenter. If you have any questions, we'll be taking questions in the chat. But we'll also have some time at the end for questions as well. So welcome everyone to our 36th annual winter conference for ANJEE. My name is Erin Rounds. I am an ANJEE board member. With me today, I have Kendra Mintz. We also have Laura McCluskey and Beth Stolting from our ANJEE board as well. So we will be putting a YouTube channel link in our chat. Please check out all our YouTube videos. There will be videos from this conference, but there are already videos from our fall conference up on there. So if you didn't get a chance to come out to the conference, please check out those great videos. Sorry. All right, so we are going to be seeing today the Teaching for Future, Educating in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This presentation will describe the United Nations framework of the Sustainable Development Goals and how they can be used for multiple teaching opportunities, both formal and informal. So get ready to learn about the goals and resources for using them. So our presenter today is Susan Golden. Susan is a retired high school science teacher and math teacher whose mission is to help people understand how to interact with our shared home, the Earth. To that end, she works with several nonprofit conservation organizations to improve their education offerings, and she speaks to regional community groups about current involvement issues, including the global warming and water scarcity. Go ahead, Susan. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Erin, and thank you, ANJEE, for having me, and thank you all for coming and listening to me. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and let's just get right into it. Okay, so this is me. This is my little organization. It's really just me. And very quickly, I have, for background, I have a bachelor's in engineering sciences from Dartmouth College, and I have a master's in teaching. I've taught in both formal and informal settings and continue to do so. And it was when I began, I've taught math through calculus, and I've also taught biology, chemistry, physics, and environmental science. And it was when I started teaching environmental science that I realized how little people know about the ways society interacts with nature. And the only people learning about it were the students taking the Envi-Sci elective. So I realized too that that most adults have no idea about these interactions, and that's when I decided to focus my efforts on teaching about nature and society. And to that end, I attended a training session of the Climate Reality Project, and that's Mr. Gore's group, and I gained access to his presentation that you've seen in Truth, An Inconvenient Truth, and I gained my voice here. But then, since then, that was 4 years ago, I've expanded. And so while this organization focuses on climate change, which is, of course, the most pressing issue of our time, there are many other environmental issues that face us. So I do want to say thank you also to Climate Reality Project. But since then, I now speak on not only climate change, but I like to focus on the solutions, not the problem. My engineering background says we need to find the answers. So with that, I focus on Project Drawdown and this En-ROADS climate simulator, and I happen to think that they complement each other extremely well to see what it's going to take to stop global warming. I talk about sustainable development in general, and today we're going to talk about teaching it, and I also talk about broader environmental issues such as biodiversity loss, habitat loss, pollution, etc. And I even talk about water and society. So this is rhetorical because I can't see you all right now, but how many of you even know, and you probably, in this audience, a lot of you do, I bet, where your drinking water comes from and where your wastewater goes. People don't even know the basics of that, and that's why I need to go out help them to learn where it is and where we get our water and our resources and what we do with them so that people can make smarter decisions. That's why I think when they're informed. But anyway, enough about me. Today, we're going to talk about teaching with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we're all on this journey together, and we each have a plan to pursue during our lifetimes. And although we follow our individual paths, in this day and age of the 21st century, with over 7.5 billion people on the planet, we have to work together in communities. So today we're going to take a look at our modern society and see how we can teach to develop a more sustainable society. And before I begin, I want to make sure we're literally on the same page. And the Sustainable Development Goals, that's a lot to say, and it's especially a lot to type if you're picking and hunting, which granted I don't. But so I'm going to be referring to them mostly either as the UN SDGs or the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So I just want to make sure, because that's what you're going to be seeing on virtually every other slide. So the goal of today is that I'm going to address several questions. We're going to talk in a very briefly, what are the Sustainable Development Goals? Because many people here in this country especially don't even know they exist, and yet they were ratified in 2015. We're going to discuss why we need to actively teach them, who should know about these sustainable goals, and where they should be taught. And we're going to spend most of our time on how should we teach the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't give you some resources to help you continue your journey after this workshop. So that's the goal. And so why not, let's get started. What are the Sustainable Development Goals? And well, according to the current UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, the 17 global goals, they were agreed by all world leaders in 2015 to address challenges including poverty, inequality, the climate crisis, environmental degradation, peace, and justice, all by a deadline of 2030. Just a small goal there, small aspirations. So there are 17 goals, and in those 17 goals, there are actually 169 targets that the United Nations is hoping to hit. And all those targets pretty much pertain to eliminating poverty, fighting for inequality, and tackling climate change. And again, all by 2030. So this is the icons for all the 17 sustainable development goals. And it might be small on your screen, so I'm just going to break it up into rows and read you all 17. So bear with me a minute. But number 1 is no poverty, then 0 hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation. And then the next row, 7, is affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, and responsible consumption and production. And then the last row is where most of the people here, since you're a member of ANJEE, is probably more focused on, and that's climate action, which is primarily to fight global warming. And the UN actually moves a lot of that information into their Paris Accord and the International Panel for Climate Change, but it is addressed here. And also 14 is life below water, 15 is life on land, and the two of them together are really respecting and protecting and maintaining the biodiversity of the entire planet. And 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions. And 17 is partnerships for the goals, because the United Nations recognizes that there's no way they can do this unless they have the support of both public and private institutions. So those are the 17 SDGs. And I don't have time to really go into any of these in detail today. Again, I have another presentation on what sustainable development is in more detail, although I'll touch on that in a moment. And I'd be happy to work with you or your organization to pursue this in more detail. So that's in a real nutshell what they are. And so why should we bother teaching them? Well, I thought the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who was Secretary General when these were adopted, He said the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are our shared vision of humanity and a social contract between the world's leaders and the people. And they're important because they're a to-do list for people and planet and a blueprint for success. So I thought those are excellent reasons of why we should teach them. And Ban Ki-moon was the Secretary General when these were adopted. But the current one, current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, also says that it's both good ethics and good business to invest in sustainable, equitable development. So why teach these goals? Well, they provide us with a framework for societal development. So I just want to break them down. These are the 3 areas that they look at in terms of sustainable development: economic development, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability. So once again, I'm going to go through, don't worry, I won't repeat myself, but these first 6 goals all pertain to human rights for everybody, because everybody should have the right to expect to not be hungry, to not live in poverty. They should expect access to a quality education and clean water and sanitation to their home. It shouldn't matter where you were born or the color of your skin or the language you speak. So this just indicates that the Sustainable Development Goals are really an ethical issue, and we really have to make this reality for everyone on the planet. And then these goals address economic development, and that's because we need a healthy, invested communities. And that means the ability to have a good job with decent pay and a clean, healthy environment with reduced inequalities. So, and then there's the environmental sustainability goals. And here, I think we all agree that we need to aim for these because we are the stewards of this planet. And we've now grown so powerful as a global society that we make an impact on the surface and the atmosphere of the planet. And I know you all know that. But that's why scientists, you probably know also that we are now in the beginning of the Anthropocene. And anthro is human, and because we can make a change, and we do. And so as stewards, it's our responsibility to learn the best practices for managing the resources we use, the waste we generate, and our impact to the millions of species with whom we share this earth. And I'd like to know, Erin, is everyone seeing the waiting room here on one of my slides?
Yeah, they pop up for us too. We got it.
But everyone's seeing them. I'm wondering if maybe you want to not make me a co-host, and then they'll stop seeing that.
Wait, are you asking if it's popping up for the audience?
Yeah, are they seeing that? I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I don't think so.
No, just
okay,
us
great.
that are co-host. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, because it's on my screen in the middle of the slides. It's no problem. Sorry for that interruption. So anyway, I think you all understand that as stewards, we need to know these best practices. And so when we have sustainable economic development, which includes resource and waste management, and when we have sustainable environmental practices, which we don't have right now, and when we include everybody, then we will have a global society where everyone's needs are being met. Everyone has the opportunity to live a healthy and fulfilling life. And that is why we need to teach the SDGs, so that everyone understands why we need this world, so everyone can understand and help to create this world. And then hopefully people can even learn how to flourish in that world. So I've kind of answered my next question already about a gazillion times, and that is who should know about the SDGs. And this is also the shortest section too. I enjoyed making this one, and that is everyone. So pretty much everyone should know about them. Most people, especially in the United States, don't, which is sad. So how do we get people to know about them? We got to teach them. And where should they be taught? Well, pretty much everywhere. Schools, right from kindergarten through high school, as well as university levels, and they are beginning to be taught in all these areas. We also should teach them in nature classes and after school activities. On the left, these kids are doing a biological assessment of a stream, which pertains, of course, to goal 14. And after school activities such as Key Club or Model UN, for example, and this, what you're looking at, is a Model UN conference at the headquarters of the United Nations in Manhattan, which is so cool. And this is high school students from around the world get together and actually try to solve some of our modern problems, which is a very cool club and opportunity for these young people. So those are dealing with the SDGs, and that should be brought to the forefront more. So again, they should be taught in even more informal learning situations like fishing trips. We can bring up the ecology and how the different species need a clean environment. Also, the picture on the right was a town-wide cleanup. And again, that pertains to sustainable development in terms of responsible production and consumption. So what we do with our waste and how we manage it is really important for people to learn about. And while I've been focusing on children here, we really can't forget about the adults, both in the public and private sector, since they're the ones that actually make the change. And we need to teach about the Sustainable Development Goals in workshops and conferences. So that brings me to the place we're going to spend a little time, and that is, how should we teach the SDGs? Well, my favorite answer is it depends. And really, it depends on what level of understanding are we hoping to achieve. And on the left picture, this triangle is Bloom's taxonomy of understanding, which you might, hopefully you're familiar with. And the bottom layer is just to know. We want people just to know that the Sustainable Development Goals are out there, understand what they are as I move up, then to try to apply them, analyze, evaluating, and then creating. And so at a minimum, we want people to know about them. At a maximum, we actually want to be living in a global society that's just and sustainable. And so the methodology that I am a big fan of is understanding by design. And I think that's because it fits in with my engineering background. And you decide what outcome you want, and then you build your curriculum from there. And that's a lot like engineering, where you define a project, its parameters, and its limitations. I'm not going to go into understanding by design. You can find a lot of information out there. But I do want to point out that how we should teach the SDGs does depend on a whole bunch of questions. And so not only is it what level of understanding do we want to achieve, but what are the capabilities of the attended audience? So here I'm mostly referring to age group. We can't expect a kindergartner to understand the same thing that a high school student is, obviously. And then how much time do we have is another big constraint on what we're going to do. Excuse me, what type of facility are we working at? Are you working in a school or at a nature center, for example? So that's going to have a lot to do with how you design your curriculum. And of course, the question we can never get away from is, what is our budget? I hate that question, but we have to have it answered. So those are general questions about how we should teach the Sustainable Development Goals. And now I'd like to look in a slightly more formal setting and just spend a moment talking about standards. So if you were lucky enough to see that great workshop yesterday on climate change, they mentioned a little about the science standards for the state of New Jersey. And one thing that could be done is that the Sustainable Development Goals should be mapped to the current standards. So we should take them and find out which standards do they fulfill if we teach them. Or you could also, there's a discussion among academia about adding another layer to education, particularly higher education. They're calling it a second skin over the present form. So it seems a little revolutionary, but really they want people, rather than take the SDGs and map them to our standards, why not map our standards to the Sustainable Development Goals? And the reason for that is because they focus more on being a global citizen rather than learning math, for example. So this is I'll discuss this a little more as we move on. So let me get a little more specific, particularly in terms of informal education. Those are some esoteric ideas. I'd like to get a little specifics to give you an idea from the perspective of an informal educator in after-school programs or nature centers, and then we'll move to formal after that. So for informal education, I'm actually going to pause on this slide for a minute to mention several ideas because I do a lot of work in this area and I love it. So one easy thing you can do is to mention the Sustainable Development Goals in your curriculum. As you're looking at the ecology or the animal or whatever you're focusing on in the space you're in, you should always be able to address the need, this is as an informal educator, to respect and protect biodiversity in any form. And so you really should have no trouble finding some targets within goals 13, 14, and 15 to draw attention to or even work towards. Better yet, your organization could develop community programs, both scientific and creative. I'm a big believer in citizen science. People should participate in collecting information about the space they occupy. It helps develop ownership and stewardship, and it also informs people of the health of their surroundings. One of my personal goals is to develop more water testing, air pollution monitoring, and biodiversity programs throughout the state. The people, both young and old, would become more familiar with scientific methods and scientific equipment and gain a better understanding of how our communities interact with nature. It also generates interest in our surroundings, and best of all, it provides us with a picture of the status of our places. Because these data collection events, even if they're not perfectly scientific, they allow for interactive visualization, exploration, and engagement. They allow you to perform analyses for better understanding and decision-making, and they can and should be a navigational tool. The data we collect tells us where we are and where we want to go, and it can also help us map out how to get there. So anything from regular water testing to bird counting events would help bring the community together, and all these activities tie into the SDGs. So one program that I do is I work with the Hackensack Riverkeeper as well as a couple other organizations, and we have a junior stewardship program for the older children. And you could also consider having an adult environmental stewardship program as well, where they do some fun things and learn about nature in addition. And then you could also have some creative activities. For younger participants, you might have a storytelling time or an art contest, and you could actually do these with adults also. And these days, people are enjoying making videos. So you could have a class to create videos and even post them on your website. And lastly, well, this isn't lastly, these are just some ideas, but during your lessons, you could extrapolate some of your findings to other peoples and places. Like maybe talk about how lucky we are to have clean, fresh water, while other people in the world have to travel a half an hour or more to get polluted, untreated water. So by thinking globally and acting locally is another great way that you can address the Sustainable Development Goals. Now on to a formal education. Well, there are many, many, many ways we can teach the SDGs. And so here's just a couple ideas to get your creative juices flowing. Mostly I'm expounding on what I mentioned, and that's map the SDGs to the current standards and try to include them in all that you are teaching in all subjects. Maybe you could, that just means spending 15 minutes or 10 minutes in a discussion on how the topic you're learning relates to any number of the goals. And I'll show you an example of that in a couple minutes. And you could also, so this is what I'm talking about, rotating the view of the material to reveal the Sustainable Development Goals. So for example, that picture on the left was one of my environmental science classes, and the students built solar cars to see the viability of that clean energy resource. So while I wasn't aware of the new SDGs in 2015, today I would teach the unit focusing on the several SDGs that it touches, from goal 3, health, because of reduced pollution using solar energy and thus reduced respiratory illnesses, as well as goal 11 for sustainable cities and goal 12, responsible production and consumption. So I'm rotating the way I'm teaching the same material just to demonstrate how it meets the Sustainable Development Goals. And another thing I can do is to use activities that achieve multiple goals. And I have a a great example of that coming up in just a couple slides. And you could also, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, consider realigning the entire system. So what if the whole school taught towards the Sustainable Development Goals? And again, I have an example on how that could be done as well. So here are some real concrete examples of how we could teach the SDGs. So this is for elementary school, to have the lowest level, just awareness. That's our expectation of the goals. And so you could have the students drawing pictures that represent each of the 17 goals and their meanings. So on the right, you see a picture of goal number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And it's cars and on a road and wind and solar panels and wind turbines. And this child, when they gave it to me, they said, I just realized it, but this could also be goal number 7, clean energy. And so we want them to be making those connections. That was just great that happened. So that's just one simple activity that could actually be done in virtually any teaching arena. And here's one for middle schools, and this brings into a higher level of understanding in terms of analyzing, and the students will understand all the targets of at least one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the activity is to create an infographic for progress towards the targets. And what you're seeing here is a trifold of some students in middle school, and it targets goal 5, which is gender equality. And my hat's off to the Newark Archdiocese, because for several years now, this is from one of their schools. All their schools, at least elementary and middle school, maybe in the chat somebody confirm if they do this in high school, because I don't have a contact there. But elementary and middle school, they learn about the SDGs every year, and in middle school, in every class. So this project, every student is assigned a Sustainable Development Goal with a group, and throughout the year, they learn what the targets are. They write it up, they look at some of the solutions and how far we've come along to that goal, and they also suggest some of their own solutions to the problem. So this is right on target to be reaching the goals and to be working with them. And now in high school, here's an activity for high schoolers, and this is actually a very big activity, and it could even be a unit. And it's an example of what I was speaking of a few minutes ago. It's a waste audit for the school. And I've done this a couple times, and it's a big project, but it achieves several goals at once, both standards, certifications, and possibly even helping your school become more efficient. So what am I talking about? When you do a waste audit in your school, one of the things you're doing is you're meeting some of the New Jersey Department of Education standards, one of which is constructing explanations and designing solutions, HSPS 1-6. And it says there to refine a solution to a complex real-world problem based on scientific knowledge, student-generated sources of evidence, prioritized criteria, and trade-off considerations. So you're doing all that when you perform a waste audit. And you're also, by the way, earning points to your Sustainable Schools certification. So this one activity accomplishes several goals at once. And it can even be expanded to extrapolate data for the district, the state, the region, etc. And it can be used possibly to reduce the waste at the facility and maybe even throughout the district, thus enhancing the efficiencies of the schools and possibly even reducing costs. So I hope these examples inspire activities to incorporate into your teaching. And I'm hoping it wasn't that big a stretch for you to see how you can take the current material and just reveal the aspects in the current material that pertain to the Sustainable Development Goals. But now I'd like you to take a look at things from a different perspective. At this point, I want to rotate our view a little further for just a few minutes. So, as I mentioned, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are a framework to help guide all of humanity to create an equitable and sustainable global society. So, and just as the Sustainable Development Goals change current systems to create new ones, which are more inclusive and more just and more environmentally sustainable. For the next few minutes, I want to focus on one word here, and it's not in red yet. I want to talk about systems. And the goal is to change the current systems. And that being the case, I think we should teach about systems. And let me explain this a little more. And some people consider it integrated teaching. But to me, you want to talk about a system because in order to generate deeper understandings, we want to look at systems which are sets of interacting and interconnected components or relationships that together form an integrated whole. And that definition is from Merriam-Webster Dictionary, and Wikipedia helps out too. A system is surrounded and influenced by its environment. It's described by its boundaries, structure, and purpose, and it's expressed in its functioning. So our planet is one big system made up of many smaller ones. Our societies are many systems interconnected with each other. And even our bodies are made up of systems that interact to keep us active and alive. And so here are some examples of different systems that we have in our lives, whether or not we're aware of them. We could study a lot of topics, issues, and concepts when we focus on any of these. And by doing so, we're providing the space and the scaffolding automatically to allow students to gain those higher levels of understanding. I don't like multiple choice tests. They don't help allow a student to get to that higher level of understanding. And by studying systems, not only do we allow for that space, but they also provide opportunities for cross-curricular programs, as well as differentiation of instruction and learning. And so I'd like to spend a couple minutes and look at one of these systems in more detail. And that's the transportation system. So we could address material in all these different subjects, math, physics, chemistry, and creative writing, language, social studies, and others. And we can also address the Sustainable Development Goals by looking at the transportation system. And by the way, just a small part of it. So we could teach the sciences. In the context, we could look at the chemistry of combustion, the physics, we can do the momentum of braking, and math can be the average time and the rates of speed we have to travel to get home on the New Jersey Turnpike on our commute every night. So those are just very quick examples. And even the social subjects we can teach by either real or imagined trips and travel logs. We could be saying that today we're going to study the Basque region of Spain. So let's look at the history of that region, the culture from that region, and maybe you're even learning to speak Spanish at the time. And of course, creative writing, you could pick any plethora of topics to have the students write on. So that's how, in general, I would use a system to teach different subjects. But I picked the transportation system because I want to link it. I haven't forgotten about the SDGs. I also want to link this to climate change for a moment. And that's because there's a parallel between the SDGs and the climate crisis. And both situations require changes to our societal systems. In order to create a real just, inclusive, and sustainable society, we must change our lives as much as in mitigating global warming and the subsequent climate change. So we have to change our lives for two reasons. And just as we have to do that, guess which one of the systems really has to change? Transportation. We have to change the system in order to stop global warming. So why? I'm pretty sure you're all aware of this, but I like, again, to make sure I've covered my bases. So the transportation in this context, I'm talking about vehicles of all types, roadways of all types, as well as maintenance and operations. The transportation, its biggest crime actually is that it uses fossil fuels for propulsion and manufacturing. And according to Project Drawdown, it's responsible for about 14% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So you and I both know that this entire system must change, the system. It's not enough that we take just the knowledge that we know it has to change and just change our individual actions. That's not going to stop global warming. It's not enough to become more efficient. We do need to pursue that. Absolutely. But it's not enough for us to just take those low level of understandings and create action with them. Scientists all agree that we have to change this whole system to mitigate global warming and climate change. So just in a nutshell, we have to curtail our fossil fuel extractions. We have to promote different transportation options like bicycles or mass transit. And we have to electrify vehicles, among other actions. And by the way, this bus is an electric bus from Quebec, and this is a Volt, which is an electric car that hopefully you're familiar with. So we have to change this system, and in order to create the change we want, we have to change the way we teach skills, or we have to change not necessarily the way we teach them, but we have to teach the skills to create the new technology and the new ways of thinking. So I still haven't forgotten about the SDGs, but when we talk about changing the transportation system to stop global warming, we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goal 13 and climate action. And we need those higher order understandings to do this. And so we should, as we're teaching about all those different aspects that I mentioned, we need to just mention that we're dealing with Sustainable Development Goal 13 so that the kids can make that connection. And as we continue to create a transportation system that's environmentally friendly and accessible to all, we can keep in mind other sustainable development goals such as these. Good health and well-being, because as we electrify, we're reducing pollution and respiratory problems. And that also goes with affordable and clean energy, because hopefully we're getting that electricity from renewable resources, and creating more sustainable cities by having more transportation options, and again, also responsible consumption and production. So I could take my whole unit and look at it through the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals and then the lens of the transportation system. And I really can hit so many different things that relate to each other. And by doing this, you are building the higher order thinking and understanding that we're aiming for. So to teach how we can try to create better systems that are more inclusive and more just and more environmentally sustainable is why I'm suggesting that we teach about systems themselves. And as we teach our subjects, our concepts, our skills and knowledge, we need to bring these goals to the forefront of our lessons. And this can be done using systems as tools to convey the complex and interconnected concepts and structures that we deal with every day, whether or not we're aware of them. And so to recap, I want to remind you that we need to teach for sustainable development. We need to teach about equitable and healthy economic development, clean cities with good jobs, good power, waste, and transportation systems. We need to teach how to exist while maintaining environmental sustainability, and we're nowhere near that right now. We have to stop polluting and restore some of the degraded habitats and learn to manage our resource needs, as well as providing for water and food security. And we must teach people to include all peoples, both here and around the world, so that everyone's basic needs are being met. We have to end systemic racism and other unjust systems. And that's why we have to teach the Sustainable Development Goals, so everyone understands why we need this world, everyone can participate in creating the world, and everyone has the opportunity to flourish in it. But I'm not quite done yet, because I promised you some resources. So where to start if you're new with this? Well, I'm mostly going to point you to the United Nations. This is a project of theirs, and it's a great place to start. They have several websites, as well as many documents. And if you click on this URL, which is being posted in the chat, that will take you to where they seem to be running the SDGs, and that's the Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations. And when you go to that URL, this is the page you'll see, and there are other pages as well. And you see here, there's UNESCO, which is responsible for education, and we're going to look there in a minute. There's also the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which offers learning opportunities. And there's the SDG Academy, which actually has some courses that you can take free and online. And there's, I don't know if it's free, but you can actually get a master's, online master's program in sustainable development from one of two universities, one of which is in Ireland. And I don't know the cost with that, but the links for these things should be going in the chat. But let's go back to this main page of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I just want to show you, if you're looking for a quick overview, if you click on any one of these icons here, it will take you, you can see an infographic overview, and they have one of these for every goal of the progress that we've made. So this is goal number 1, to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. And while the report is saying that we were off track, I have to tell you that we were not on track to hit many of these goals before COVID hit, because they are very big aspirations. But we had been reducing poverty significantly over the last 3 or 4 decades. And yet when COVID came, it's the first increase in global poverty in decades, and over 70 million people have been pushed into extreme poverty in 2020 due to this pandemic. So they have this infographic, they've got 17 of them on their website. If you choose a different tab, you can learn about the targets and indicators for each of the goals. So this is goal 13, climate action. And as I mentioned, much of the specifics there are in the Paris Accord. But I just want to give you an idea, and the text is probably too small, so I'm going to read it to you. Target 13.3, it applies to us. It's to improve education, awareness raising, and human and institutional capacity on climate change mitigation, adaptation, impact reduction, and early warning. And so that's one of the targets that they're aiming for in goal 13. And so how are they measuring the progress? So that's the indicators. And this is gray area, just says it in indicator 13.3.1, is that they're looking at the number of countries that have integrated mitigation, adaptation, impact reduction, and early warning into primary, secondary, and tertiary curricula. So again, what we're doing now, and what I'm proposing, is that we are actually trying to meet the target 13.3 by using that indicator. So that's the more conceptual idea here. But let's get to the nitty-gritty for a moment, and where can I find some information that I can actually use in my teaching? And for this, I recommend that you go to UNESCO. That stands for the United Nations Educational, Scientific, Cultural Organization. And this is the main website for the Sustainable Development Goals. That's going in the chat right now, that link. And thank you for doing that, Kendra. And this is the main page that you should see. And it just explains why we should have education. If you can click on any icon here to find out more information about that goal. And so in this case, I decided to click on goal 6, and that's clean water and sanitation, and it's something close to my heart. That's what I work with the Hackensack Riverkeeper. And each goal has a couple pages with resources for educators. So here it starts out, this is a screenshot, and I don't expect you to read it, but pretty much it talks about why education is crucial to achieving the goal. And then it does discuss it in different levels: early childhood care and education, primary education, secondary education. And then further down, it has even more resources. So this is just another screenshot, but at each of these levels, it provides multimedia educational resources, pedagogical resources, and ideas for classroom activities, as well as exemplars to help you get inspired in your classroom. So there's a lot of material right there on UNESCO to help you, and you can go to the other sites to actually learn more about these goals if you'd like to become educated in a little more detail. So there's one other site I want to point you to, and that's one of my favorite websites, and that's Our World in Data. These people are great. They've got graphs for everything, and as a science and math person, I like graphs. So I love to visualize data, and so do they. And this organization actually made their own website for the Sustainable Development Goals. And there's that link there. And you click that and it will take you to their SDG tracker. And Our World in Data has created a page for every goal, at least, and I think for every target. And so this one is goal 2, which is to end hunger by 2030. And the target here is the prevalence is to end undernourishment, to have everyone be nourished. And the index or indicator to determine if we're doing that is the measure of the prevalence of undernourishment. So they describe it here a little bit. And on the right, you see the graph, this map, where the colors indicate the darker the color, the higher percentage of the population that is undernourished. And too many in red. The goal, of course, is to have everybody on this map in the yellow zone. And that would be wonderful. So one of the things you see on this particular map is a lot of gray. And gray means no data. And that's another piece of the Sustainable Development Goals, is that the United Nations is trying to create standards, universal standards for the information we report, the methodology for reporting it, as well as the rate for reporting it, so that we can go forward and actually measure real progress towards a sustainable society. And so the last slide I just want to throw at you, if you're interested in changing an institutionalized view, as I've been hinting at, you may want to read, this isn't very long, it's called Education for the SDGs in Universities. And you can see the link there, and that's also getting posted to the website, to the chat. And that's just an excellent document. And while it is focusing on universities and tertiary education, it talks about rotating, it talks about creating a second skin to go over the departments. So no more history, or in addition to history, I guess, and in addition to math, we take a look at the SDGs. And eventually we could consider possibly changing those departments even. So this is an excellent document if you're looking at it from an institutional perspective. And so that was a lot of information I just gave you, and in a moment I'll be love to answer questions. And I'd love to help you with your organization or your school district to help implement some SDG curriculum or even some environmental curriculum. And I do want to put a plug in. I'm the chapter chair of the New Jersey chapter of Climate Reality, and it's like a coalition. We meet once a month. And I'm bringing it up to you because we offer 5 or 6 professional development opportunities a year. They're free. So last week, we just had a discussion with the author of how to talk to your children about climate change. And if you can just get on our email list, you can join the New Jersey chapter. It means really nothing, at Climate Reality, or you can find us on Facebook. And then you're on our email list, and you can find out when our next workshop will be, which I think is going to be late February. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to come back and take some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. That was great. I got one question from Mike Skelly. He wants to know, has New Jersey core content standards been mapped to the SDGs? And if so, where can we access that?
To the best of my knowledge, no. The New Jersey standards, it's my understanding, I'm not super familiar with how current. I understand they're redoing the science ones, I think, in the next year or two, or looking at it. We know that they've just incorporated climate change into all the standards across the board, and that's as far as they've gotten. So I don't think that many of the school districts in the country are very focused on the Sustainable Development Goals, to be quite honest with you. I don't think they really care yet. Hopefully we can open eyes and demonstrate the importance, how they really pertain to everything. The end of systemic racism, that's a big term, but what does it mean? How do we get there? As well as changing society in so many ways to curb and stop global warming.
Great. Kendra, were there any other questions?
None in the chat, but I have one. Do you have a recommendation for does your recommendation for which SDGs to tackle kind of change with the age group? Like, are there certain ones that you're like, these are the best ones to kind of bring on an elementary level? These are the ones that I would start introducing on a middle school level, at a high school level, for anyone that kind of works with a broad range of grades, how they might want to structure that?
That's a great question. But I like to aim high as a teacher, and I want the opportunity there for everyone to make a connection. So I guess the more esoteric things, like particularly 16 and 17, the two last goals, they don't need to, they're a little esoteric for young children. But really we can pick, heck, even just learning the vocabulary of what responsible consumption and production means. You know, if we've got vocabulary that the children don't understand, then we can't teach it, is the way, that would be the limiting factor. But hopefully you can find ways to change the vocabulary. I think children at all ages should be exposed to all of them. I think it's the level, let's at least start by knowing what they are. You know, just a quick tangent. When my children were very little, I taught my son to say thank you when he was like 1, when he could talk. Say thank you, say please. And my brother said, why should we teach them that now? They don't understand what it means. And I already want it to be a habit by the time he understands what it means. And so my point is, if the kids at least know what these things are, that lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy, that's why I brought it up, then I think that's a beginning to how we're going to develop the higher order understandings as they personally grow.
Excellent. That's very interesting. So if we have any questions from the audience, now's a great time to type it in the chat, because I know the SDGs covered a lot. So you would recommend that we don't prioritize any one SDG over the other? It's really the collection that you really have to be presenting to the students.
Well, you asked me about based on age level.
Oh yeah, I'm asking another question.
And now if I look at it in a different perspective, I personally, and I think you all are going to agree with me, that, you know, actually it becomes a personal perspective, but I think that the environment is our biggest issue, and climate change and global warming. If we want, the world is changed. While today is bitter cold, you can't go ice skating on any of the ponds here in New Jersey, and when I was a girl, you could. And according to Central Park, there are 22 fewer days below freezing on average since there was in 1900. So the world is warming up. If you were at yesterday's presentation, you certainly saw the evidence of that. And so I think that we have to drum that into people, because that's what needs the most action. And as we do it, we have to reform our other social institutions as well. But I'm very happy. January 20th was such a happy day, wasn't it? A curtain lifted. And now I'm ready to go driving down that highway of changing our environment.
You know, it's an important idea that no matter what happens with politics, our fight for the environment kind of never ends. I saw this great little comic with a little girl. I'm now going off on a tangent. Sorry, guys. A little girl asking her mother, and it didn't name politics. It was just like, mother, what do we do if we lose? It's just like, well, then we keep fighting, we keep pushing, and we never stop until we have change. And she's like, okay, and what do we do if we win? The same thing, child. Like, there's no complacency. There's no we've won. We just have to keep pushing. What I love about the SDGs is I'm a very goal-driven person. So I'm like, okay, let's put it on the board. These are the things we're trying to do. Let's check it off so I can't forget it. So I really just want to say thank you. I very much enjoyed the presentation. I'll turn it over to Erin because we have no more questions in the chat. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. I think everybody, including our co-hosts, all enjoyed the presentation today. We appreciate your time with us. Do you have something else to say?
Yeah, I want to address Kendra for a second. And, you know, I don't like to think that we're always losing the environmental wars, but well, lately I feel like we have for the 4 years, but I'm going to put that aside. But let's remember, and that's the same thing with these sustainable development goals, is their terms of development. Life is changing, life is going to change. We have billions of people and the population's going to grow, predicted to grow throughout the century. So,
Right.
and our fixes, let's face it, we are choosing some avenues in order to fight climate change. And the worst thing is if we find that we have unintentional bad consequences. But that can always arise despite as much analysis and planning as we do. So things are just, the goal shifts and changes, and we have to change with it. And the big challenge at the moment is to get everyone headed in the right direction. But hopefully, as we approach and progress on these goals, that's how society can advance in a much more efficient and equitable manner. And thank you. I'd like to thank you all for having me and letting me and listening to me. And, I can put I hope you got my website. You can contact me there. It's Golden Education. If I were 15, I could type and speak at the same time. .com. And you can find out more about me. By the way, I don't charge. Don't tell my husband this, but I don't charge for most of my work. So I know school districts are really, tight with their money right now. So if you'd like some help or all, that's just what I want to do is help out. So again, thank you very much. Enjoy this cold weather.
Great. Thank you, Susan. And just for everybody out there, before we close up this session for today, we do have a couple more things going on for our conference. This is our last official workshop, but tonight we have at 6 o'clock our happy hour. So just a get together of all of us like-minded folks, followed by our second keynote speaker, Dr. Maurice Hall at 7 o'clock. And then tomorrow we have some field experiences going on. Hopefully you all have signed up for those. Even though it's going to be chilly, it's going to be a great time. And tomorrow evening, we will have our EE Excellence Awards hosted by Pat Heaney. Please join us in celebrating Tanya Osnowich as she receives the Pat Kane Lifetime Achievement Award. If you don't know Tanya, it's hard not to know Tanya, but if you don't know Tanya, she is an awesome educator in the state for about 35 years. Not just her, but we'll be celebrating some other great EE folks this tomorrow evening. So thank you also to our conference sponsors, PSEG, New Jersey Natural Gas, and our anonymous donor who just wants to be known as a supporter of science and EE in New Jersey. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully we will see you all again this evening or tomorrow evening, and enjoy your weekend.
Okay, thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Great job.
Thank you,
Thank you
Angie.
so much.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you for a wonderful conference in a very difficult time for bringing us together.
Thank you.
Nice, yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.